So, Matt, welcome to the House of Visionaries podcast.
Brian, appreciate you bringing me on.
Yeah, awesome to have you. Super excited to chat today and to welcome you, Matt. As you know, we've just announced you as one of our UK board of Visionaries, which I'm really pleased with. And the goal is obviously to help shape the direction of the community and tackle those biggest challenges in TA. So, really excited to work closer together on that. And today really is about getting to know you, what's helped shape you as a leader, and all the value and all the experience that you can add to the community. So really excited to dive deeper. I think every time we've had a chat, Matt, we've been short of time, and it feels like we're running out of time. So I'm pleased to dive deeper today.
I keep my American Bostonian answers short and succinct.
Yeah, I might need some hints and tips on the American lingo. Um, so today, as I mentioned, is all about getting to know you. But for a quick intro for people that don't know Matt, he's a talent architect, a serial builder, and has built and scaled some of the biggest brands and companies in the world. So the likes of Monster, Meta, Amazon, and Deliveroo, and now on another scale up journey with Nebius. So the other thing, Matt, which we may dive into, is I know you've got a unique background with your time in the US Marines, which has shaped some of the fundamental leadership practices that you have as well. So let's jump in. Um, so Matt, you're on the board of Visionaries now. We've announced that. One of the key questions that we ask every new board of Visionary is, what does visionary mean to
Well, I think in order to understand like a phrase in a statement, you kind of need to understand like the purpose of it. So like for me, like what is a vision generally speaking, because I think a lot of companies and teams set these things up. They do a mission, vision, and goal strategy. But for me, the vision is like the shared direction or set of guiding principles that help us understand where we're going. And if collectively as a board, we're going to be the visionaries, then we need to be creating that shared direction, or at least that shared ideology of what's going to be happening within our trade and within our industries over the coming years, especially with AI and everything like that. So, it's less about creating constraints and rules and guidelines, and I think it's more focused on alignment. Trying to provide as much clarity and sense of direction so people can make really good decisions. They can remain autonomous. People understand the direction they're going, which means they can innovate, they can build, and they can scale. So it's really about thinking, what are we building for in the long term? What principles are going to guide how we get there? And then, obviously what risks and dependencies do we have along that journey? So this guiding path is something that I'm hoping we're going to be able to shape, for our industry, especially in the UK and probably globally, and how we build and develop and scale, talent functions in the future.
you? Yeah, I love that. I love the clarity piece as well. I don't think necessarily people think visionary and it's all about big thinking and predicting what's coming in the future. And obviously there is an element of that, but I think there's also a more important element almost of the conviction about the direction. So it's great having a vision, but you need that conviction and intent to then go and execute against it and actually deliver
Yeah.
it. Otherwise, it's just a big vision. It's just a big thought. So yeah, I think it's twofold.
There was an old quote that I actually don't know who I can attribute this quote to. Like I almost have gotten to points where I've attributed it to myself, which is a bit weird to
Take
say.
it.
But initiative without action is irrelevant. So like we can have as much vision and future identity as possible, but if you don't have a path to walk down to get there, and you're not like physically actioning that, then it's just a theory. And like theories are great, but theories, they don't scale companies. And so I think it's living in between where you want things to be, where you are today, and then operationalizing the middle of it.
Yeah. And just touching on that, so the businesses that you've operated on, which we'll get into, but just focusing in on the vision,
Yep.
when you're either joining or interviewing for these businesses and you're trying to get your head around the vision, can you get a sense of that, like intention and actual execution and the direction, or can you get a sense of that early on, or is it once you're in the business you actually then can believe it?
I think interviews are the most aspirational conversations you have with companies because they really generally, at least in the last decade, they're trying to pitch you quite hard. Or like there's a relativity of pitching. I actually think the more they sell you in an interview, the more broken their systems are and their
Yeah.
infrastructure is. And the less they sell, the more confident they are in their system. Um, and so, I think that's a pretty good indication, if I'm quite honest, if they've understood how to operationalize vision, mission, and strategy. If they've operationalized it really well and it's being executed against, you have OKRs in place, you're constantly reviewing it, then the likelihood is like you have a company that's generally walking down together. If they haven't, then that means that it's not as a sync strategy company, which is also okay. It's just I guess comes down to your comfortability of operating in chaos. And so yeah, I mean, can you find it out? Yeah, but let's be honest. Every time you come in after you've been there for 6 months, where I'm just at 5 months now at Nebius, and then you start really seeing, what is the goals of the company, what is the goals of the individual leadership, and things like that. Which it's not drastically different than what they sell you in the interview, but it's different enough where if you shape your vision too early at your company, it's probably going to change 5 or 6 times by the time you actually land on the final result.
Yeah, interesting. And there'll be thinking of our community of TA leaders. There'll be a group that naturally are visionary and pride themselves on that, and it comes natural. And there'll probably be others that maybe are pushing into that space and they want to develop that. Do you think being visionary is something like you're born with, and it's just that natural mindset you have, or is this like a muscle that you can develop?
A lot more naturally creative people for sure. I've worked with a fair share of them that naturally have this intrinsic ability to see into the future and predict it and work through that. And that's such a great trait. I'm not one of those by any means. I think my experience and the visions I've created and the vision I have generally for our industry is more off the backs of the challenges that I see are happening, and that evolution that happens every single year when I've been in these roles has, not drastically changed the vision overall. It's just changed how it would be executed. But yeah, I would say that there are people that just have that creative inclination just by their nature, and I'm very jealous of them that they have that. My brain doesn't tick as much like that. I think I'm more mission oriented, more operational, and it works for me. So it's like, it's not I don't think it's a one size fits all approach, but I guess if you don't have those, you need to be very active of assessing, what's happening on your teams. What are they actually struggling with? What is their capabilities? What is the talent gaps that you have on your team? What the company you're working for actually need over the course of the next 2 or 3 years? What other companies are doing? And so you do have to be a little bit more active to actually hone that vision together versus those that have that really natural ability.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to your point there is you don't need everyone to be a visionary. That's not the concept. You don't need that. You need a diverse mix of skills and assets in that team. Okay, awesome. So let's rewind a little bit, Matt, and get to know you a little bit better. So I know the community would love to get to know your journey and what shaped how you lead. So where did your career start, Matt? And what was your biggest influence on your career in the early days?
Well, I think like most people in recruitment, I didn't, dream of being a recruiter. I kind of fell into it. So I was actually in construction, and I was working on a project in Savannah, Georgia. Showed up to the project. They were supposed to have 900 laborers. They only had 90. They asked me if I would be willing to go help them hire, and I was like, I guess so. So I got in my pickup truck. I put my hard hat on. I would drive job site to job site to job site. I'd get out, hand them a business card, say how much you make in an hour. I'll give you $1 more plus better benefits and holiday pay to come work for us. And so I ended up doing it in a couple months. They ended up offering me to work in their home office in HR. And, almost 20 years later now, here I am. So, I kind of stumbled through this journey. I would say, getting into the leadership role, obviously coming from a military background, is helpful in the terms of leadership. Because within like the military leadership structure, right, there's this thing called commander's intent. And it's not really about saying, like you see in the movies, you go left, you go right. It's more about creating that vision and the idea of like what the overall mission components are, and then allowing and empowering, leaders underneath you all the way down throughout the organization, then define the outcomes and the strengths, and then the teams can own the execution. We don't have to have a centralized method of how we execute. So, but a lot of things come with that, where discipline ensures team freedom and autonomy. So, like, in our case in recruiting, data integrity allows you to be more autonomous because we don't need to fact check you. Expectations, ownership, standards are clear. People can move faster without, the chaos, because we have tenants, we have structure and vision to come to. And then having some calm under pressure just allows people to understand that they can make mistakes.
Yeah.
So it just really helps me focus on, like, I think the core principles of leadership, which is, clarity of ownership, providing decision rights and empowering teams to have the accountability and ownership of things as opposed to ownership of tasks. So I think that's really helped me, especially in a recruiting org where it's very, very easy for people to micromanage down. Because let's be honest, the biggest metric of success in my role is how pissed off the executive leadership team is generally. And that's basically been my KPIs for about 15 years now.
Yeah.
And so, like, that creates a lot of forced down pressure, but in reality, it shouldn't. Like, it should just be our operating roadmap of, like, okay, these are things we actually need to fix. You need to go fix it. So I think that's provided a lot of experience. And then obviously coming through this journey for 15 years or so in leadership roles, been at 8 different companies. They all operate differently, but in reality, most of the problem statements have been relatively similar. Lack of operationalization, unstructured planning, and things that, end up impacting things like bandwidth, capacity, capabilities to scale, programatizing your work streams, creating like an actual vision and a strategy. So oftentimes, like, just doing that gives your team 20% additional productivity.
Yeah. It's such a unique, like, transition into TA, and I always love hearing about leaders where they sort of started their careers and the environments that sort of set those key fundamentals. And I don't know a huge amount about the US Marines, but I can imagine that high performance culture. We talked about the trust and the standards, and I can see how that can easily shift into building a great sort of leadership team and a culture and everything within that. So
and for the TA leaders on the call that watch this, they'll appreciate this. I think being in the military gives you, like, and especially when you're in leadership in the military, is a very incredibly high tolerance for pain. Just because, the nature of the bureaucracy of any government entity, forces an incredible amount of pain down on, junior leaders throughout the organization. And so, in TA, we do have to carry a lot, and we do have to have a high tolerance for pain. And I think it is a skill set for these leadership roles.
So you've got thick skin. You're prepared for TA. Awesome. All right. So we're talking about the UK Board of Visionaries, Matt, and can't go without noticing the accent. Where's home originally, Matt? Tell us about that, and what brought you to the UK?
Yeah, so I grew up in Boston, just on the outskirts of Boston, and spent most of my life there by military time. Started my recruiting leadership career there, and then I ended up moving to the UK just about 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
So if I'm honest, it was for personal reasons I moved over at that time of life, and I've just decided to make it my home. So I've got my leave, not leaving anytime soon. Have investments here in the UK. Obviously, I have a young son that was born a couple of years ago, Finn, and so I enjoy it. I currently live in Margate now, so not in the city anymore, but get in as often as I can.
Yeah, nice part of the world. Just outside the city, close enough to get in to the hustle and bustle, but also close enough to get out and
it's great coming off the train because you get that actual real fresh air, and you're like, okay, I'm at home now.
Yeah, I'm the Southwest. I know the feeling. I love the city, but also getting out and just, like you said, the fresh air and the space is for me. I'm a country boy. So we've gone to the community, Matt, and we've asked them, what would you like to know about our Board of Visionaries? And we've got a few quick fire questions, bit of fun just to get to know you a little bit better. So I've got 3 questions here for you, Matt. So the first one is, what's the biggest challenge that you see in the TA space in 2026?
I don't know if it's the entire TA space, but it's just a notion I've been picking up a lot on. I've been talking a lot about is we tend to move directly from strategy to execution, and we skip over operationalization, and so that creates a lot of chaos in tow. But I think that's because we now have so many tools that we're relying on that we don't actually know how to use that well. All these new AI tools, all these new planning tools, all these other things that we've probably become a bit too over reliant on, and we haven't really operationalized how to make them successful. So I think a big problem we're going to see, especially this coming year, is like there's such a large suite of tools that TA leaders can access. But if you're not operationalizing them well, you're not integrating them well, you're not connecting them well, then the value of those are going to drop significantly in your mind just because you're not getting the right data sets out. So I almost kind of feel like the problem I'm going to see is there's almost too much stuff going on and too many systems that aren't actually working the right way. The second thing is the talent landscape's really weird. I've come from nearly 15 years of being able to create quite a repetitious top of funnel, quite a repetitious mid funnel, quite a repetitious bottom of the funnel. And nowadays, like you just can't create that standard. It's interesting time that I haven't seen before. And I think like walking into that ether, we're going to have to actually build out, what does talent intelligence mean? If we're sitting with our leadership, how are we actually going to go get top of market? Like, what is our capabilities to do that? Are they willing to invest in that? And then, is our brand proposition going to help us there? So I don't think it's a drastic different issue than what we've seen for the rest of our careers. It's just we're in a little bit of an unknown ether because there's been so many redundancies. People have been out of work for probably longer than they've wanted to be, and talent's been a little bit neutered, in the past few years from where it probably was about 6 or 7 years ago, where now we are just very focused on recruitment as opposed to the talent life cycle. And I think a lot of those things are going to start to come to a head this year that we need to figure out how to solve for. But, again, it's the operationalized piece. How do we get systems talking? How do we get back to that spot around, leading with data, but not in the way of like a funnel working backwards analysis? How are we reviewing quality of hire? How are we helping impact internal mobility programs? How are we, scaling out talent reviews and succession planning to help understand this, how we go out there and mitigate those talent risks. But it's almost like we're going back into a cycle that I remember seeing like 15 or 16 years ago, where it was like this before, when this term, the war for talent, actually started popping up, which I thought was ridiculous. But I kind of feel we're getting back to that state where a lot of people are going to be fighting for a very small subset of what could be considered top of market, but only by notion, not by quantification.
Yeah. I think, like you say, the world of TA is, I think it's always evolving, right? But I think the last sort of 12 to 18 months is probably we're going through, and beyond that as well, we're probably seeing the biggest transformational change that certainly I've seen in the last decade. And I don't think we know what the new norm looks like. Like you say, there's so many vendors, there's so many different options. We're in this sort of test and measure phase. Some people are a bit further along the journey, and then it's like, okay, we've got some ideas of how this is going to add value to our business, but how do we now measure it? Are we getting our ROI on these tools? What do we remain human? What do we remain AI, or look at automating? So there's still so many things to figure out along that journey, and I think we've probably got a little bit to go before we know what the new norm looks like. But it's going to be an interesting space.
Yeah, I could talk about this subject for hours. Really, I could. But my one sentence statement is we as talent leaders need to figure out, how are we showing value outside of the list of hires we deliver in a year? How do we actually show our impact on the company's roadmap, the company's revenue streams, the company's profitability, capabilities? Because that's where we can firm up the success of our programs. Obviously we hit the headcount pacing plan. That's great. But like, what did that deliver for the company? And I think that's where we can start connecting those dots.
Yeah. Interesting. The same, I could chat about it all day, and there's so many little bits to cover. But we'll keep it moving. We've got our second question from the community. So Matt, if TA didn't exist, what career would you pursue and why?
That is a great question. I'd probably do two things, because by the time I had the capabilities to do this, I was sucked too deep into the financial throes of the corporate industry. I was interviewing for the Secret Service, and
Amazing.
would really have liked to have continued to go down that track, but the comp was below my current comp, so I stayed in recruiting. The second thing, I just because I've done it my whole life, construction. I've owned construction companies. I've done a lot of house renovations, house flips, things like that from a real estate perspective, and yeah, I'd probably double down more on that.
Yeah, really interesting. And two very contrasting routes as well.
I know. Well, the second one's kind of related to talent in reality because, I like to take things apart and put them back together. I always have cars, houses, talent acquisition infrastructures. And so it's just, I'm a puzzle oriented human. I like to see how the guts of something works. So the Secret Service thing, that's just related to being in the military. And I would have enjoyed that kind of camaraderie and esprit de corps.
Nice. Okay, third and final one from the community, and this is the real juicy one, Matt. If you had to choose UK chocolate or US chocolate?
Honestly, now, and I'll say this because I just came back from Boston this morning. And I had some chocolate in bed because I was stuck due to the 48 centimeter snowstorm. UK chocolate, if I'm honest, I'm now realizing that US chocolate tastes chemically and a bit fake, unfortunately. Sorry, everyone. But yeah, it's a bit too sweet.
We'll take the win. The UK community take the win, and the right answer for the UK board as well.
It's delicious. I'm not gonna lie. I won't go down my whole list, but it's a large one.
Love it. Awesome. So moving into your career then, Matt. So you as we've mentioned, you've built in some pretty iconic places: Monster, Meta, Amazon, Deliveroo. It's clear that you're a builder. That's what you're passionate about. That's what you love doing. Across those journeys, what would you say has stayed consistent, and what's really changed in each of those environments and as you've scaled?
Um, I It's a funny one. The one thing that always stays consistent in recruiting is 50% of your time you're the best friend of the company, 50% of the time you're the worst friend of the company. And the real way to bridge that gap between the two of those is, how well you communicate throughout your organization and how big or how much transparency you're creating around what's happening, right? I think the more we shirk on data, the more we get the bad guy. The less we shirk on data, the more we get the good guy. So I think that's been constant for 20 years. But what I've really seen, most of the things I've seen in talent since I've been in it in a leadership perspective feels negative when I say it, which is I feel like there's been degrading values around what the role of a recruiter or a talent acquisition partner, whatever we're going to call it, is. I feel years ago there was a lot more connection between like recruiters, competency frameworks, talent review, succession planning, attrition, team risks than there is now. And so I feel like the centers of excellence have split off quite a bit and siloed themselves from where it was, let's say, pre 2019. And so I think that's a risk for us because it does sometimes put us into a track of more administration and process management than actual talent strategy. So that's a change I've seen. But again, it's in ebbs and flows because I remember when I was a recruiter, it was very administrative. And then we had this big curve of strategic, and now it's going back into this administrative. So that's one piece. The other thing that I've seen is the market's moving so fast. No longer are people staying 3, 4, 5 years at companies that consistently. Okay, maybe 4 or 5 years. You're seeing generally 2 to 3 years on average. And so the question is why? And, there's a huge piece of cultural acumen. There's a huge piece of lack of brand proposition, employee value proposition. Like, what are they getting outside their job and their paycheck? And I think it's a little bit more cutthroat than I think the current audience of humans that are in the workplace are, which now we're spanning 4 generations. This is interesting. So when I first got into this, we're really spanning about 2, just on the cusp of getting millennials in. Then we were 3, now we're 4. So you got from boomers down to Gen Z in the workplace. And we're not deeply far off from Gen Alpha coming in. So the spread of generational humans in your company is massive, probably the largest I've seen in my career. And I think that creates a weird degree of complexity when it comes to the amount of autonomy, the amount of accountability, the amount of leadership equity you're able to use up. And so that's a new thing for people to think about. And instead of being scared of it, you should just be thinking about how you lean into it.
Yeah. And you've like you said, you've been at a number of different businesses and scaled them from a few hundred to a few thousand. If you were to compare, say, scaling a business 10 years ago to scaling a business in today's market, which do you think is harder and why?
Well, 10 years ago, I think we started to get this. FANGs are the litmus test by which we all measure ourselves. If you go a little bit further back, 12 years ago, there was a lot of companies thought of things like revenue per employee, different KPIs and metrics like that. And so um, scaling became a little bit more repetitive. You think of like the Oracle models or the SAP models back in the day, it was very rigid. Their workforce planning structures had a lot of rigidity to them. Where now, we had a period of time between 2014, 2018, where it was a debt-based industry, right? Where companies could go and get a bunch of debt to go finance headcount. So like at any time you could be getting new investment. Databricks is a great example, Series A through Series, whatever they're at now. And it's like they're consistently getting this. So it's hard to create that repetition, which means to scale, you're always behind by 15 to 20%. And so that's kind of continuing now, except the fact that the investment's like not debt investment, we're buying a future product investment that you need to deliver. So it's actually even worse of a complexity than the debt-based one because you actually have to deliver and you have to deliver fast. So it's a lot harder, but it requires a lot of confidence to go and get 20 to 30% bloat in your head count, ensure that you have some justification to support it based on your conversations with leadership. But we can't be so prescriptive with planning like we used to be the last few years. Each recruiter's productivity is X per month, and therefore we're going to deliver X. It's like that's never going to get you to growth. That's going to get you to business as usual baseline. So we do have to be a lot better at seeing around the corners.
Yeah, I love that. And I think there's so many things, like you mentioned, processes, tools, people, systems, etc. And I think hiring at scale there's also an element of like getting great people in and hiring great leaders whilst you go on that journey. If you're looking at the teams that you're building, are there any like core principles or skills or behaviors that you're looking for specifically in the leaders that you bring into your businesses?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. For me, when I look at like my specific leadership team, I really need builders as well. Like I can't rely on myself to be the only builder, but I think communication and influence are going to be very high on the list for me. Bias for action. So being able to identify challenges and go out and solve for them quite quickly with their teams. Stakeholder management. So how well are they able to like guide their stakeholders and like bring them along the journey of the vision with us? And then, not to steal an old Amazon LP, but locally self-critical. Are we constantly looking at ourselves and assessing, are we doing the right things? Did we do the right things? And being, retrospective as consistently as possible to say like, can we improve on this next iteration? I like to try to get my teams to that do 10% better every day mentality, because once you get there and the machine's rolling, then, you do actually have 10% iteration every day.
Yeah.
But to get that, you need your leaders to be able to have that mentality and drive that mentality as well.
Yeah, really interesting. I think getting those great leaders, they can be like, we know that they can be transformative. So making sure that we're bringing those into the business, I can see the value in that. We spoke about like the last decade and evolving TA space and what it looks like. But if you had a blank canvas, Matt, and if you could redesign the TA function from scratch, what's the first thing that you'd throw out, and what is it that you'd protect at all costs?
So, in a nutshell, I really like the candidate recruiter business recruiter model. I think developing really strong senior recruiters into a talent partner, client lead type model, backed by, a team of candidate based recruiters or rec based recruiters is the right way to create the right communication scale. Um, if I'm honest, and this is going to be super controversial, I'd love a tool that gives us a lot more insight than LinkedIn gives. I feel like coming from Monster.com years ago, and also being old school, we used to have a stack of resumes or CVs on your desk that you'd be flipping through you'd have sticky notes all over them, to now where, in order to get the information that we would just have readily available for us, it requires time. Now, obviously, you have AI, there's technology to help you with that now, but like the amount of extra time we have to do to quantify versus what we used to do, it's exorbitant. You're looking at thousands upon thousands of hours of people doing tasks because we don't have the right information. So I'd love to see that. What I wouldn't want to remove is the human element. We're not quite down this track yet, but pieces of this are starting to shape itself into our infrastructure. We see it all the time. I saw an article the other day around, I don't remember, maybe New York Times, where a bot applied to a job. The bot of the job then replied back, and then a bot did a screen, and then this bot made it all the way to a live conversation. And then there was two AI interviewers talking to each other. And so, removing the human element of our job is going to like actually degrade the quality of and the trust with which companies will have when it comes to acquiring talent. So, figuring out how do you balance technology doing the work technology should do and people doing the work that people should do is going to be really important. So it's, as you look at the team structures, it needs to account for that.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's our role as TA leaders in the space to protect that human-to-human interaction. And I think the work's not going away. I hope that the advisory model almost seems inevitable in that space. And if we've got tools to automate and to add value to some of the lower level tasks, then why would we not use that? So if we can use AI to create that space to do more advisory and more impactful strategic work, then hopefully that's the place that we're all trying to work towards getting to.
Yeah, I mean, there's this you could make the argument that regardless of anything, a system could potentially drive the same result as a person, in theory, right? The algorithms are there, the AI is there, the structure's there for them to both arrive at the same result. That the question isn't arriving at the same result, though. The question is about experience and prediction of future success. And so I've still yet to see an infrastructure that is better than a really good recruiter that's been embedded with the business long enough where they know them, they know the behaviors of the team, they know the players on the team, and they can say, Ryan, this is the person that's going to be the next person for your team. It's going to take it to the next level. And this person's proven themselves to you before, and you're going to trust them, and their hit rate proves that. A tool isn't going to be able to do that because it's not going to hit the emotional necessities of that individual leader. It's only going to hit the statistical relevance of what that leader needs. And so that requires us to train, because people aren't trained like that anymore in recruitment. People aren't trained to have that kind of approach with the business anymore. They're trained to be very overly data oriented, to drive the results instead of like having that personal relationship. So, as much as we try to steer away from that and how we structure orgs and remove single points of failure, it still is the best way to make the sausage.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the people that are the most adaptable are going to be the ones that pick these things up and evolve, because it's moving so fast. Every single week, every month, something else is evolving. So yeah, it's an interesting space. It'll be interesting to see where we land. So bringing us to the here and the now then, Matt. So you've landed at Nebius. You mentioned there you've been there for around 5 months. You're in deep hypergrowth mode, tripling headcount and building AI infrastructure at speed. So when you land at a business like that as a TA leader, like there's so many things that you need to tackle. But when you first saw the scale and the vision of what you're aiming to achieve, what are the principles that you anchor on before building anything?
Yeah. So I generally look at things overall from like 3 major lenses. Like, what's the talent, what's the technology, and what's the tactics we need to actually accomplish the task? Because those 3 things are going to cover. In the military, you used to call it beans, bullets, and band-aids. So do you have your food? Do you have your ammunition? And then do you have your first aid kit? So that's kind of the general idea. But I think the main ones I look at are, creating clarity before we move to speed. It's too easy to just immediately move to speed. But, ensuring that you have the right level of ownership and accountability determined, exercising clear intent, distributed execution, making sure that stuff happens, ensure you have decision gates, is ownership clear, is accountability explicit, um, and then are we allowing execution to happen autonomously, at the lowest responsible level. Um, I also think talent is architecture, not throughput. I talk about being a talent architect, which means as we're doing, flying the plane as we're building the wings, as they say, but like as you're doing it, the throughput, you need to be thinking in terms of architecture. So how do we create this repetitiously, not as a one-off event? Ensuring that the bar is a leadership obligation. So as you're going through your process, even at a macro perspective from my level or as an individual level, what are the standards that we're going to need? Even if you don't have official standards in place and frameworks in place, we still need to create that bar and that standard with our leadership. I repeat this quite often, and I'm going to do it again. Accountability and ownership enable scale. The more we centralize things with me or my leadership team, the more we're creating risk. The more failures that are going to be built in the systems, the more we can enable that accountability and ownership as deeply into the org as we can, the higher degree of success. Single-threaded dependency, again, I think that's just a killer to systems. Anytime you have to rely on a single person to do anything, that's a leadership failure, and it's definitely going to impact your capabilities. I think we need to operate as a business function, not as an HR function. And what I mean by that is, if you look at how sales approaches their presentations to the company, like the GTM teams, we should be approaching it the same way. We are a revenue driving part of an organization, and we should act like it. If we act like a service, then they're going to treat us like a service. If we act as a business function, they're going to treat us as that. So this helps us build trust, not erode it. And it also helps us create volume without, any judgment or speed misalignment as well. Data is a weapon, not a report. This is what's going to steer the direction of what we're doing, but also eventually the direction of the company. So we need to make sure that we're using data to make better decisions. And if we don't have data, then we need to get it, or we need to start building really strong anecdotes as well. I also really dislike ambiguity. Everybody says it's always ambiguous, but I think as jobs as leaders is unclear intent creates silent failure. So, creating the environment for your team to freeze when tensions rise or when things get difficult, which then requires single thread dependency, right? So it is a consistent steamroll effect throughout your organization if you don't work hard to remove ambiguity. And just because you have ambiguity as a leader doesn't mean your team should have ambiguity. This is where your vision, this is where your tenets really come into play. It's like, you can still continue to operate even if the areas are gray, because we rely on our core principles, of prioritization and things like that to make sure that we're able to get behind. And then the last one to me, leadership, is based on durability, not visibility. So the systems we're building will they stand the test of time? Or are we going to have to rejig them in 6 months? Are we going to have to rebuild them next year? Are we going to have to restructure them holistically, period over period? So success is really what's left behind in reality. If you look at this from a 4-year window, if I'm moving on to another adventure in 4 or 5 years, 6 years from now, and I look back at how much of that's going to stay with the organization and how much is going to be removed when I move. So it's really about how do we create that strong, clear, and resilient infrastructure that will be resilient without me here.
Yeah, I love that. And so many insights to sort of take away. And I like I said, we could talk about this all day and jump into every single one, but I'm definitely going to steal the 3 T's. I love that. Talent, tactics, and technology. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to steal that one. But it's also
it's a very 90s approach, I will admit, but generation.
though, because what it cuts through the noise. It cuts through the noise, and you've got this practical way to be able to like break that down into 3 core areas. So I think it's a great framework. Amazing. What a great place to land. So Matt, it's been awesome learning about you, your journey, what's influenced the way you lead, and genuinely just getting to know you better. And I'm sure the community have taken a lot of value from this. So welcome again to the UK Board of Visionaries, Matt. I'm super excited to have you on the board and help shape the community and work closer together in the future. And thanks for being our first guest.
Yeah, I look forward for what's to come.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
Cheers.